Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Yashodanandana Brajajanarangana Yashodanandana Yamunatira Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. 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 Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 19, text number 4. Saha Chantayan Ittam Tata Ashrinot Yatha Munehe Sutta Uktaha Nirritihi Takshaka Akhya Saha Sadhu Mene Na Chirena Takshaka Analam Prasaktasya Virakti Karanam Sachintayan Nittamata Shrinodhyatha Sachintayan Nittamata Shrinodhyatha Mune Sutokno Mute Sutokto Niridista Kshakakyaha Mune Sutokto Niridistakshakakyaha Na sadhu mene na chirena takshaka Sasadhu mene na chirena takshaka Lalam prasaktasya virakti karanam Nadam prasaktasya virakti karanam Sachintayan nittamata shrinodhyata munisutokto nirtistakshakakyaha sasadhu mene nachirena takshaka nalam prasaktasya virakti karanam Sajintayan nittamata shrinodhyata munisutokto nirtistakshakakyaha sasadhu mene nachirena takshaka nalam prasaktasya virakti karanam
Sachintayan nittamata shrinodhyata
Sajintayan nittamata shrinodhyata
Mune sutokto nirtistakshakakyaha Sasadu me nachirena takshaka Nalam prasaktasya virakti karanam Sachintayan nittamata shrinodhyata Sutokto nirtistakshakakyaha Sasadu mene nachirena takshaka Nalam prasaktasya virakti
Sajintayan nittamata shrinodhyata
Mune sutokto nirtistakshakakyaha
Sadhu mene nachirena takshaka
Sasadu mene nachirena takshaka
prasaktasya virakti karanam Saha, he the king.
He the king.
Chintayan,
Thinking.
Itam, like this. Ata, now. Ashrinod, heard. Yatha, as. Munehe, of the sage. Sutta Uktaha, uttered by the sun. Niritihi, death. Takshaka Akyaha, in relation with the snake bird. Saha, he the king. Sadhu, well and good. Mene, accepted. Na, not. Chirena, very long time. Takshaka, snake bird. Analam, fire. Prasaktasya, for one who is too attached. Virakti, indifference. Karanam, cause. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. While the king was thus repenting, he received news of his imminent death, which would be due to the bite of a snake bird, occasioned by the curse spoken by the sage's son. The king accepted this as good news, for it would be the cause of his indifference toward worldly things. Purport. Real happiness is achieved by spiritual existence or by cessation of the repetition of birth and death. One can stop the repetition of birth and death only by going back to Godhead. In the material world, even by attaining the topmost planet, Brahmaloka, one cannot get rid of the conditions of repeated birth and death. But still, we do not accept the path of attaining perfection. The path of perfection frees one from all material attachments, and thus one becomes fit to enter into the spiritual kingdom. Therefore, those who are materially poverty-stricken are better candidates than those who are materially prosperous. Maharaj Parikshit was a great devotee of the Lord and a bona fide candidate for entering into the kingdom of God. But even though he was so, His material assets as the emperor of the world were setbacks to perfect attainment of his rightful status as one of the associates of the Lord in the spiritual sky. As a devotee of the Lord, he could understand that the cursing of the Brahmana boy, although unwise, was a blessing upon him, being the cause of detachment from worldly affairs, both political and social. Shamika Muni also, after regretting the incident, conveyed the news to the king as a matter of duty, so that the king would be able to prepare himself to go back to Godhead. Shamika Muni sent news to the king that foolish Shringi, his son, although a powerful Brahmana boy, unfortunately had misused his spiritual power by cursing the king unwarrantedly. The incident of the king's garlanding the Muni was not sufficient cause for being cursed to death, but since there was no way to retract the curse, the king was informed to prepare for death within a week. Both Shamika Muni and the king were self-realized souls. Shamika Muni was a mystic, and Maharaj Parikshit was a devotee. Therefore, there was no difference between them in self-realization. Neither of them was afraid of meeting death. Maharaj Parikshit could have gone to the Muni to beg his pardon, but the news of imminent death was conveyed to the king with so much regret by the Muni that the king did not want to shame the Muni further by his presence there. He decided to prepare himself for his imminent death and find out the way to go back to Godhead. The life of a human being is a chance to prepare oneself to go back to Godhead, or to get rid of the material existence, the repetition of birth and death. Thus, in the system of Varnashrama Dharma, every man and woman is trained for this purpose. In other words, the system of Varnashrama Dharma is known also as Sanatana Dharma, or the eternal occupation. The system of Varnashrama Dharma prepares a man for going back to Godhead, and thus a householder is ordered to go to the forest as a vanaprastha to acquire complete knowledge and then to take sannyas prior to his inevitable death. Parikshit Maharaj was fortunate to get a 7-day notice to meet his inevitable death, but for the common man there is no definite notice, although death is inevitable for all. Foolish men forget this sure fact of death and neglect the duty of preparing themselves for going back to Godhead. They spoil their lives in animal propensities to eat, drink, be merry, and enjoy. Such an irresponsible life is adopted by the people in this age of Kali because of a sinful desire to condemn rabbinical culture, God consciousness, and cow protection, for which the state is responsible. The state must employ revenue. Foolish men forget this sure fact of death and neglect the duty of preparing themselves for going back to Godhead. They spoil their lives in animal propensities to eat, drink, be merry, and enjoy. Such an irresponsible life is adopted by the people in the age of Kali because of a sinful desire to condemn Brahminical culture, God consciousness, and cow protection, for which the state is responsible. The state must employ revenue to advance these 3 items and thus educate the populace to prepare for death. The state which does so is the real welfare state. The state of India should better follow the examples of Maharaj Parikshit, the ideal executive head, than to imitate other materialistic states which have no idea of the kingdom of Godhead, the ultimate goal of human life. Deterioration of the ideals of Indian civilization has brought about the deterioration of civic life, not only in India, but also abroad. Om Ajnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Mahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Taparakamagam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatham Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Satitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitascha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Krina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Pranamami Priye Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna 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 Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. It's on the mute for the Zoom audience.
Sachintayan Ittamatashrino Nifa Mune Suktokto Niritis Takshaka Kyaha Nasadhumine Nachirena Takshaka Nalam Prasaktasya Virakti Karanam. While the king was thus repenting, he received news of his imminent death, which would be due to the bite of a snake bird, occasioned by the curse spoken by the sage's son. The king accepted this as good news, for it would be the cause of his indifference toward worldly things. So it's a very interesting verse here in the Srimad Bhagavatam. King Parikshit, who was the emperor of the entire world, has received news that he would be killed within 7 days, and he's considering it to be good news, which is kind of surprising because I think even all of us would consider it to be very bad news if we were to find out that he would die in 7 days. And King Parikshit had a lot more to lose than basically everyone else in the whole world. So let's try to understand exactly why he had this mentality. It's obviously a very extraordinary personality, not just because he's materially very elevated, but as we find out, as the Srimad Bhagavatam progresses, he's also spiritually very elevated. And the Srimad Bhagavatam, it gives us a glimpse at the personalities, and not only the supreme personality of Godhead, but also of his great devotees like Parikshit Maharaj. And by hearing about them, we can imbibe those same qualities. It might not seem like a very desirable trait to be eager to die for worldly people, or even spiritually minded people. So it's kind of interesting that the king considered this to be good news, as if he was kind of welcoming the idea of death. This is in modern times considered to be emo, right? People that want to die, people that want to harm themselves, people that want this world to be destroyed. It's a very pessimistic outlook on life, and it's considered to be very tamogun. Even we consider people like that to be very tamogun. But this is different. The king wasn't in some kind of depressed state where he was just hopeless in life. And he just wanted to stop existing. He just wanted to die. He wanted the whole world to also, crumble apart. But Parikshit Maharaj, he understood that there was a higher value in life than to just simply try to enjoy in this material world. Srila Prabhupada, he opens the purport by saying that real happiness is achieved by spiritual existence or by the cessation of repetition and birth and death. This is news to us conditioned souls who, for unlimited amounts of lifetimes, have been searching for happiness in this material world in different forms of life, different species, enjoying in so many varieties of ways. But here Srila Prabhupada explains that the real happiness is only achieved by spiritual existence, which means existence in Krishna consciousness, service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, which naturally results in the cessation of the repetition of birth and death. Everyone in the material world has to go through different sufferings. Some might suffer more than others, but we see that even the king of the entire world, he also had to undergo the suffering of birth, death, old age, and disease. It's not something which can be avoided even by the most powerful, most opulent, most materially elevated personalities in this material world. And this is explained in the Bhagavad Gita, where Lord Krishna says, Abrahma bhuvana loka punaravartam urjana, naptuvanti mahatmana, amapete kontiya, that all the way up from the highest planet of the material world, Brahma Loka, all the way down to the lowest, this whole entire universe is actually just a place of repeated birth and death, which means repeated suffering in different varieties. So it's interesting that we have a lot of idols in this material world. Parikshit Maharaj was undoubtedly one of those idols which the general populace was kind of looking up towards and considering to be kind of like the pinnacle of material existence, and kind of trying to pursue that. Yad yad acharati shreshtas tattariva evetaro janaha. So yad pramanam kurute loko yam, what is it? Lokas tadanuvartate, something like that. So what the standards which great men set, that the whole entire world pursues those standards. They almost imitate the activities, and they try to imbibe the same mentality of these great personalities. This is, of course, still present today. I had a good friend growing up who was so obsessed with Eminem, the rapper, that he really tried to imbibe his entire existence. He purchased the same clothes that Eminem wore. He kind of convinced himself that he was in a similar situation that Eminem was in his songs, where he was expressing frustration with his family life and his drug addictions, things like that. Even though this guy grew up in the suburbs with a very nice mother and father, and but simply by meditating on that music, the vibration, Eminem, he was trying to imbibe those same qualities. And the same thing with all these sports athletes, and we put up their pictures on the walls, much like we have Lord Krishna and Srila Prabhupada here, just for the purpose of reminding us what our real goal is. Whenever we kind of get distracted in life, we can always look at Michael Jackson, Michael Jordan, Duncan, or LeBron, or whatever, Ronaldo, so that we can meditate on these people and imbibe their qualities. Sangat sanjayate kama. So by association with them, our desires are kind of shaped and formed. So it's actually the intention of the Supreme Lord. After the entire Mahabharata unfolds, where the Pandavas were established on the throne of the entire world, it was the desire of the Supreme Lord that such a devotee as Parikshit Maharaj would be sitting on that throne, to set the example for human beings in general to pursue something more than just material happiness, so-called material happiness. Showing them by their own example what the real purpose of human life actually is. It kind of shows us the frivolous nature of pursuing material happiness in this world whenever such a great person like Parikshit Maharaj neglects these, kind of renounces them as if they're useless. We also saw this with George Harrison in some ways. He publicly spoke that he became a musician, started that band for the purpose of becoming rich and famous. But whenever they became rich and famous, he realized that's not what life was all about. Pursued the spiritual path, and of course, he donated lots of money and things to the Hare Krishna movement. And we see even today that he is influential to some people, not a lot of people, but to some people. So in this way, the society is supposed to be built where such a person is uh, in a position of authority in order to guide the general public back to the proper path, Krishna consciousness. But still, we see that it's very rare for such a person to occupy such an exalted material post. And generally, whenever somebody is granted that level of power and opulence and influence and authority, they take it in a completely different direction. Those people are considered to be more worldly, more materialistic, further away from spiritual life. Of course, in modern times, this system of having a king, which is the absolute power of the state, is abolished because everyone has realized that they'll only become corrupted. So that, because of that, in a lot of ways, those who are materially poverty-stricken are more qualified for taking up spiritual life because they're already at that point of not having so many material things to be attached to. Parikshit Maharaj, he exemplified that it's important to give all of these things up to go back to Godhead. But if we never had those things in the first place, it's much easier. We don't have to go through that pain, the painful situation of having things taken away from us at the time of death. And therefore, great devotees like Queen Kunti, they pray that may I always be in a state of trouble, material trouble, where I'm always struggling. So that means that apunar bhavam, that punar nadarshana, something. Punar janmanandam. Tatra tatra. Anyways. Whenever we're in trouble, that means that we'll see the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And that means if we see the Supreme Personality of Godhead, that means we won't see repeated birth and death. So that's the mentality of the pure devotees of the Lord. They're more interested in seeing the Supreme Personality of Godhead than seeing their great kingdom, seeing their bank balance, seeing their beautiful wife, etc. So it's by his example, Parikshit Maharaj is teaching us that actually this isn't what we should be pursuing in life. But even if by the will of providence, by our own karma, if we have been given all of this opulence, not only should we accept that as responsibility to lead the society, but also we should be prepared to renounce that opulence whenever the time comes to leave this world. Because generally speaking, if one is attached to all these material things, it's an incredible impediment on the path back to Godhead. It's Bhogaishwarya prasattanam taya paritachaitasam devasayatmika buddhi samadho na vidhiyate. Then one cannot actually reach samadhi. And of course, the perfection of samadhi is Krishna consciousness, pure devotional service. If he has attachment to enjoyment in this material world, Bhoga Ishwarya. So as a devotee, he could understand that this was actually the mercy of the Lord. This was the blessings of the Lord. That not only was he leaving this world and he was going towards that goal, going back to Godhead, but that he had been given a kind of a warning. He got 7 days to live. Prabhupada explains that this is very rare. Most people don't know when they're going to die. We think that old people are going to die, but being old just means you're closer to death. Everyone dies, and there's been plenty of people that have died at a young age too. So you can never really say who's old, who's closer to death. Parikshit Maharaj was very fortunate because of this, and he exemplified that whenever one is approaching death, they should become completely absorbed in hearing and chanting about the glories of the Supreme Lord. But since we don't know when we're going to die, it's better to follow that example now, whether we're going to die in 7 days or 7 years or 7 decades. It's it's a great mistake that a lot of people make to think that youth is a time for enjoyment. I'll spend it like that, and then middle age is a time for working hard and building up a family, and then when I'm old, then I'll focus on religion, and I'll become more serious in Krishna consciousness. I'll start following more strictly, chanting more rounds or something. But we see practically in so many examples that, first of all, you may not reach old age. And second of all, if you do, by the time you've done so much enjoyment in your youth and you built such a nice material situation in your middle age, by the time you're an old man, there's so many more things to be attached to. You have some kids and you think, okay, after my kids grow up, then I'll leave home. I'll focus more on Krishna consciousness. But then when that point comes, then your kids have kids. You know, they look after the grandkids. And so it's this is why it's called samsara. It's very binding to this material world. Family life is known as samsara. It's like family life and repetition of birth and death are like synonymous, actually, in a lot of ways. So therefore, they for one who's serious about going back to Godhead, they're not interested in becoming materially advanced in opulence. But even if by chance they do get material opulence, they still maintain a proper disposition, understanding that everything's meant for the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So this is considered to be a blessing of the Supreme Lord that he was going to die soon. They even Lord Brahma prays to Lord Krishna in the 10th canto that you know a devotee considers it the mercy of the Lord, even if they have to wait for a very long time and suffer. Is that the Tenukampam Susamikshama. But the devotee just tolerates, considering it to be the mercy of the Lord, even if he's in a condition of suffering. He understands that actually I deserve much worse, but the Lord is very kind. And especially he's very kind to great devotees like Parikshit Maharaj and those who follow in the footsteps of Parikshit Maharaj. So he's setting the right example for human society in general. The role models of modern day Western society are actually just leading people to a hellish existence. They're promoting irreligious activities, sinful activities. They're promoting material enjoyment and not even mentioning anything spiritual, or if they do, they're only mentioning it to kind of gain the adoration of those who are kind of pious. But a proper leader in society is one who directs the general public to a life which is dedicated to the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And traditionally, cultures were set up in a very systemized way to where even those who didn't really have so much of an inclination to become a devotee of the Lord, they could still make spiritual advancement simply by being a part of that society, being born in that society. They are given a lot of benefit. And of course, the perfect system for that is known as Varnashram Dharma, the division of society into four orders of social and spiritual statuses. And where every man and woman is trained to conduct themselves, live their entire life for the ultimate goal of pleasing the Supreme Personality or Godhead. Srila Prabhupada has said in the purport today that this Varnashrama Dharma is also known as Sanatana Dharma, or eternal occupation, which is interesting because a lot of times we think of Varnashram Dharma to be something material, and in many ways it is completely material. Lord Chaitanya, and he kind of rejected this as being the supreme goal of life, for being an external thing. He didn't say that it should be rejected, but he did say that it's an external thing, and that actually there should be something deeper than that. But here Srila Prabhupada is equating Varnashrama Dharma with Sanatana Dharma. So why is that? Of course, Sanatana Dharma is the eternal nature of the soul, and Lord Chaitanya also says that I'm not a Brahmana, I'm not a Vaishya, I'm not a Shudra, I'm not a Brahmachari, I'm not a Grihastha, I'm not a Sannyasi, etc., etc., etc. I'm an eternal servant of the servants of the servants of the servants of Krishna. That's the real eternal nature of the soul. But for one who has understood this, that they are an eternal servant of Krishna, they have fully accepted the principles of Sharanagati, accepting that which is favorable, rejecting that which is unfavorable, etc., etc. Which means that if something is favorable for the execution of their service, they'll happily accept that, like the institution of Varnashram Dharma. One who is serious about going back to Godhead will naturally take the advice of those who have paved the path back to Godhead in the past, instead of trying to manufacture their own new kind of process. The system is tried, tested, and proven to work. So an intelligent person, instead of exercising their so-called intelligence for formulating some kind of new process, where they become more intelligent than their predecessors, they use their intelligence to strictly follow the example which has been laid out by their predecessors. And who is a better predecessor than the Supreme Lord himself, Lord Krishna? It's not that some man came up with this system. This is Lord Krishna's system. Chaturvarnyam maya srishtam gunakarma vibhagasha. Sikartaram imam vidhyakartaram avyayam. Even Lord Krishna says that, this is how it is. This is how it will always be. Even I can't change this. Even I am not able to change this. This is just how it works. Of course, Krishna could change it if he wanted to, but he's kind of demonstrating that this system, Varnashram system, cannot be avoided for the civilized human being. That if the human society is not engaged in the duties of Varnashram Dharma, they're considered to be animal life. But Varnashram Dharma is the distinguishing factor which separates human beings from animals. So therefore, Parikshit Maharaj was a prime example of Kshatriya, who was meant to enforce these principles in society. And we see that even though he's kind of he's waving the flag of Varnashram Dharma in society, he's always interested in hearing from the Brahmanas what they have to say and following their instructions, as we heard very nicely from Tara Prabhu yesterday, explaining the principle. So if one neglects the duty of preparing themselves to go back to Godhead by accepting the path which has been paved by the previous acharyas, if they neglect that duty, then they simply spoil their lives in animalistic sense gratification. There's not so much of a gray area. I just reading last night, I pointed out that they wrote in the third canto, Prabhupada in one purport says that there are two types of activities in this world. There are activities of sense gratification and spiritual activities in Krishna consciousness. Very clearly, there's only two. And then he said that those who engage in activities of sense gratification are demoniac, and those who engage in activities of Krishna consciousness are devotees or demigods. So, there's not a whole lot, Prabhupada doesn't leave a whole lot of room for gray area between these two things. Of course, not everyone is going to be at the perfect standard, and we shouldn't, have an offensive mentality that if someone isn't completely pure, then they're simply animals, demoniac animals. But the proper goal should be set, and it should be very clear. And this example was set in a traditional varnashram institution where the Brahminical society always upheld the highest level of refined culture, not only in their knowledge of Shastra, but even more than that, in their personal example, in their behavior, which was observable by everyone in society. Maintaining the worship going on in the temple, always enlightening the general public, and knowledge of the Supreme Lord and in his devotional service. And in this way, even if one is situated in a seemingly lower status of society, they see that this is what we should be pursuing. And if we can't ourselves come to that standard of being fully dedicated to the service of God, we should at the very least assist them in their service with the intention of also being involved in those activities of Krishna consciousness. So those who adopt a system of life which is contrary to the principles of Varnashram Dharma are actually Srila Prabhupada is saying that it's because of a sinful desire to condemn Brahminical culture. We're trying to imitate the so-called Western culture and reject the principles which have been given in the Shastra and have been demonstrated by the previous great souls who our Srila Prabhupada has recommended that we try to follow, then it's actually coming from a place of enviousness of the Brahminical culture, a sinful desire to condemn Brahminical culture. Condemn Brahminical culture, God consciousness, and cow protection, for which the state is responsible. We're trying to impress Krishna in our Krishna consciousness. We're trying to please Krishna in all of our activities, which means that naturally this Krishna consciousness won't be very pleasing to those who aren't interested in pleasing Krishna. But if instead of wholly and solely trying to please Krishna in all of our activities, if we're trying to please the general public and make them feel like this is a very nice thing, and they should all they should feel like this is a very nice thing, and they should feel inclined to join the Hare Krishna movement and to become devotees of Krishna. And in many ways, that's all of our activities are kind of shaped around that aspect of outreach to the people, attracting people to Krishna consciousness. But if we adopt even an apparently external culture, which is only meant to kind of jive with the modern demoniac civilization, which is completely sinful for so many different reasons, but specifically because it's not promoting Brahminical culture, God consciousness, or cow protection. If we adopt those same principles, which the sense gratifiers are interested in, just for the sake of attracting them, they're not becoming attracted to Krishna consciousness. They're becoming attracted to those same types of sense gratifying activities, or the culture, which assist them in sense gratification. So for that reason, Srila Prabhupada wanted to create a revolution, not only in the spiritual consciousness of people in general, but he wanted to create he wanted to usher in a new type of culture, even in the Western world, which followed the model of that same culture, which was prevalent in India for thousands and thousands of years. And we can go through so many instances where Prabhupada would almost equate Indian culture with Varnashram Dharma, and Varnashram Dharma with Sanatana Dharma, which means that this modern Indian culture, which has become famous for Bollywood and so many, I don't know what else, IT industry, and I don't know, there's not a whole lot of things that they're famous for. Other than that spiritual culture, that's the real Indian culture that Srila Prabhupada is talking about in the purport today. Indian culture means Varnashrama Dharma, Sanatana Dharma, which includes an entire lifestyle beyond the activities that the Brahmanas are performing in the temple, the Mangalarati, the 16 rounds, the prasadam, everything like that. But it extends to all stratuses, all different stratuses in society, and gives everyone the opportunity to participate in the spiritual activities of Krishna consciousness, not just those who have accepted that responsibility of full time dedication to Krishna consciousness. So instead of following the example and the teachings of the politicians and scientists and scholars who have very intricate and very sophisticated analysis of this material world, sociology and anthropology and so many different things, and the psychology, understanding the general mentality of people in general, and then trying to adopt those teachings to spread Krishna consciousness. Oh, psychology is saying that instead of adopting their recommendations for how we should live our life and how we should practice Krishna consciousness, better to follow Acharyas, Parishad Maharaj, Srila Prabhupada, and his bona fide representatives, even if it might not be so pleasing to the general public, and even if it might not be so pleasing to us ourselves. It's our duty. We want to proclaim to be a follower of Srila Prabhupada, to try to imbibe his mood and mission holistically, not cherry picking what we like and then also adding what we like. Of course, you can do it, and I don't think anybody's gonna curse you and die in 7 days for doing it, but good thing to think about. Sorry, was I supposed to end at 9 o'clock? 8 o'clock. Sorry, all that. Does anyone have any quick questions or comments? David, about the
Your question. Question. So Varnashram Dharma, we see it hasn't taken place. There's no system for it in society right now. So then, how is it still possible to make spiritual advancement without it?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I mean, in other parts of the world, completely separated from Varnashram culture, even the Lord sends his representatives there. We don't see Jesus Christ necessarily preaching that it's to do Varnashram Dharma, but for their level and time, place, and circumstance, they can shape their lives in a certain way, which will help them to make that advancement. And there are anomalies where even in those kinds of cultures and systems, they become pure devotees of God, but it's very rare. Whereas in Varnashram Dharma, in traditional Indian society, I mean, a lot of people, they have this idea that Jesus is the only person that's ever been sinless in the entire existence of ever. But in Indian culture, there's so many saints who are revered for living a sinless life. So it's not ideal, but it's possible.
No, I'm just thinking that because Chaitanya Mahaprabhu knew the implications of Kali Yuga and how a monumental task it would be to establish Varnashram, although Srila Prabhupada wanted it and Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur wanted it. They wanted it developed on the basis of this verse, Jnane Priyasa Mudapasya. Because even if the cultural structure wasn't there, if someone could just do that, then they could, some number of people would be able to catch the principle of that process and be able to engage in pure devotional service. But Varnashram, the specific purpose of it is to create an atmosphere where more people can take to that process more easily.
Mm.
With that process alone, some number of people will be able to make significant advancement in Kali Yuga. The point of Varnashram is that it's to facilitate a broader spectrum of people to take advantage of that process. I just wanted to
One thing on that, this idea, we hear that some astrologer, someone said that Srila Prabhupada is going to build a house in which the whole world could live. And a lot of people have this idea, well, you can't live in a house with only one room, and this Krishna consciousness is only one room, and only certain people can join and participate.
Yeah.
So the idea of Varnashram Dharma is to create a house with many rooms, many different kind of like ways which people could plug into it. Not that we divide that one central room, in other words, the Brahminical class of society, and kind of water it down to where people can, to where we can all fit in one room. That's not exactly the idea of that. That we water down the standards in the temple, the standards for initiation, etc.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I just wanted to share something that I read yesterday regarding what you were bringing up regarding the neglect of culture. I was reading Sri Bhakti Chintamani last night by Sri Ramanuj, and this came up with the qualities of devotional service when he's speaking about Klesha. He said there's another dishonoring of Srila Prabhupada's attempt to advocate for Western Vaishnavas. He's speaking about how even though Vaishnavas may come from a fallen background, he's speaking about through engaging in the process of devotional service, they can rise to the standard of being pure Vaishnavas because of this advent of Kleshagni and Shubhada.
Mm-hmm.
And to the degree that the devotees adopt the lifestyle of Krishna consciousness and the principles of Krishna consciousness, and then to that degree, they actually have become accepted as Brahmanas. And you can see that Srila Prabhupada's preaching initially was accepted actually. He had to fight against it on the kind of the stage which Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati initially established by fighting against it. And then Srila Prabhupada actually came out successful. And you can see that many places in India, like if you go to a Madhva temple in South India, they'll honor Western Vaishnavas actually. They'll really respect them. Same with Sri Vaishnavas. But Shiva Ramaraj is making this point here that there's a way in which we can dishonor Srila Prabhupada's preaching. First, he mentions the devotees' misbehavior in the Dham, and then he brings up this on a broader scale. There is another dishonoring of Srila Prabhupada's attempt to advocate for Western Vaishnavas. While not as grievous as the others mentioned above, it nonetheless misrepresents his divine grace. It is the widespread failure of devotees to embrace the cultural ways of pure Vaishnavism. A few of the many aspects of Vaishnava tradition that have fallen by the wayside include the wearing of Vaishnava attire outside the temples, men shaving their head and maintaining shikas, and women's braiding their hair, Brahminical standards of cleanliness and education, regular attendance at the spiritual programs, maintaining the teachings of the Srimad Bhagavatam as the value system governing the devotees' lives, and most serious of all, the neglect of the very spiritual practices that transform us into pure devotees. Vaishnava culture as devotees practice it in the West, which Srila Prabhupada happily cited as evidence that his Western followers were becoming purified, has been watered down to become a hybrid culture in which Krishna consciousness is no longer a full-time way of life. In some parts of the world, Krishna consciousness now appears to have joined other sects and become simply a belief system. Thus, for many of Srila Prabhupada's followers, the prediction of his divine grace critics has come to pass. By transforming Krishna consciousness into an impotent semblance of itself, these devotees fail to become purified of past habits and remain sadly victimized by past deeds and sins.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's very relevant in today's program. Yeah. I mean, I was just thinking that if we try to a lot of some devotees might cite that previous major world religions, they weren't able to really assimilate with the general society in general without adopting cultural nuances and things that are kind of outside of that. But this Krishna conscious movement isn't, we don't want to be like every other world religion.
Yeah.
We don't want to, I mean, just look at the state of all world religions today. Do we really want Krishna consciousness to be like that in 200 years, 300 years? No, this is something different. To something different. Vijay Prabhu? Alright. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Yes.